was in many ways sort of the foundation of Islamic philosophy. And so when the Latins retook Toledo, they found this existing school of translation. And at first they set them to work translating the works of Aristotle and other scientific works from Arabic into Latin. But pretty soon they figured out, well, hey, why not go back to the Greek? And so pretty soon they were getting direct translations directly from the Greek into Latin. And so during the second quarter or so of the 13th century, a lot of works of Aristotle translated into Latin. Initially, they were banned by the church, or at least at the University of Paris, which was the main center for theological study. The reading of Aristotle was prohibited because it was seen to be dangerous and seemed to be in conflict with the Christian faith on at least a few key points. Aristotle teaches that the world, the cosmos, has always existed, for instance. He teaches that the soul is not immortal. And he is teaching about God in some ways is in conflict with Christian belief. So there was this tension and this fear, but by the 1240s that ban was lifted, and they realized it was futile to sort of, hide their heads in the sand. They had to come to terms with this. And so the first great figure to attempt that is Albert the Great, Albertus Magnus, he's called, teacher of Aquinas. He was a Dominican, as was Aquinas, and he wrote in, say, the 1250s, 1260s. Among these works are many commentaries on Aristotle. Aquinas kind of follows in his footsteps, also wrote many commentaries on Aristotle, and makes great use of Aristotle's philosophy in his own work. And you can see both Albertus and Aquinas as attempting in a way to baptize Aristotle and to show that Aristotle is largely consistent with Christian faith, and where he's not consistent, he can be shown to be wrong. Okay, but otherwise, for the most part, where possible, they would tend to accept and agree with him. And so it leads to this sort of phenomenon of Christian Aristotelianism. That becomes typical of scholasticism in sort of the High Middle Ages, the 13th, 14th centuries. Well, I'll contrast that then with the Byzantine East, where the pattern is very different. Aristotle's works were never lost. They were written in Greek. The Byzantines, of course, possessed them in their libraries. Now, whether they were read, that's another question. Because already by the time, say, of the Cappadocians in the 4th century, Aristotle among philosophers had been somewhat relegated to a subordinate position. This was a development within pagan philosophy. Pagan philosophy had become predominantly Platonic. We would call it Neoplatonism. They would have objected to that name. They would say, we're not neo anything, we're followers of Plato. The term Neoplatonism is a 19th century German. But the Neoplatonists did include Aristotle within their philosophical curriculum as a sort of a preliminary stage of study. And they took this attitude that Aristotle's fine if you're talking about the natural world, or if you want to learn to study logic and clear reasoning. But that theology is the province of Plato. And so Aristotle's works were read by the Neoplatonists, and there are extensive commentaries on them by Neoplatonists like, say, Philopatus, who was also, by the way, a Christian. He was an Monophysite, wrote some theological works. Simplicius is another one who's well known and very prolific. And lots of others. But anyway, people like, say, the Cappadocians, as you know, St. Basil and St. Gregory Nazianzen, both were educated in Athens and had an excellent education from pagan teachers. But they would have studied rhetoric primarily, more than philosophy. So most likely they would have read a lot of Plato, but looking more for his style and for the beauty of his work than focusing on the philosophical items. Not that you can totally separate them. They're clearly aware and in tune with many of the philosophical ideas. But they weren't studying them quite as the way that the Neoplatonists would. And Aristotle, they probably read some of the Organon. That would have probably been part of the educational curriculum at that time. The Categories was a very widely known, widely read work. But they were more likely, perhaps, they might have read digests or summaries of Aristotle's logic. There's one famous one called the Isagoge by Porphyry. Isagoge just means introduction, leading into something that was widely read. And this has largely remained the case even in the Byzantine era. As I understand it, at least, for the Byzantines, if you ask, say, for instance, what did St. Maximus know of Aristotle? Well, probably would have read much, if not all, of the Organon. Categories, I'm not sure about the others, but at least those works were included within the standard educational curriculum, along with commentaries on them by Neoplatonists, especially preferably Christian Neoplatonists. There were people like David and Elias and others who were Christian commentators on Aristotle. And the thing that gets tricky when you ask about Aristotle's influence in the East, so they were not, for the most part, reading the more technical, lengthy, difficult works like the physics, the metaphysics, the Daonica. Very few people would have been reading those except specialists. But even other educated people like St. Maximus or St. John of Damascus had read enough, including the commentaries. Well, see, the commentaries include ideas drawn from these other works. And so, just because, say, Maximus or John Damascene didn't read the metaphysics, you can't conclude that therefore they didn't know anything about what was in there, because they had read commentaries on the logical works written by trained scholars who did know the larger corpus. So there was always some continual Aristotelian influence, primarily though within the area of logic. And if you read, for instance, John Damascene's Dialectica, you know, the first part, he wrote this three-part work called The Fountain of Knowledge, of which the second part, is on the Orthodox faith. That's the third? Okay. Second is, so the first part is the Dialectica. It's a discussion of the meanings of terms, primarily, key theological terms. Second part on heresies, third part on the Orthodox faith. Anyway, if you read the Dialectica, those definitions of key theological terms, ousia, prosopon, hypostasis, are largely drawn from the commentators on Aristotle, such as Porphyry and these others. So that kind of Aristotelian influence was always there in Byzantium. But what didn't happen, for the most part, until perhaps very late, there was never this sudden moment of recovery of, oh wow, now we have the whole system, as the scholastics had done in the 1240s and 1250s. And see, for the scholastics, that posed an enormous challenge. Here's this massive, comprehensive body of work that has something to say about everything, is often very tightly reasoned, very highly informed, a lot of empirical observation that goes into it, and yet it's contrary to Christian faith in some key ways. And so this leads the scholastics to this sort of way of thinking that you don't find in the East, where they distinguish natural reason from revelation. Aristotle is taken as the great spokesman and exemplar of natural reason. And whatever Aristotle shows and demonstrates is exemplary of what can be known by natural reason. And so you get these ideas such as, well, the existence of God can be demonstrated by natural reason, and the immortality of the soul can be demonstrated by natural reason. Actually, those 2 points or claims became part of dogmatic faith in the Roman Catholic Church at the Fourth Lateran Council. Descartes refers to that in the preface of the Meditations, that it had by that time been decreed dogmatically by the Catholic Church that the existence of God and the immortality of the soul can be demonstrated using natural reason alone. And that's just a way of thinking, and a way of sort of dividing the realm of knowledge that didn't exist in the East. They didn't think in those terms of what can be known by natural reason versus what requires revelation. Because reason, logos, is already a form of revelation, you might say. You know, our reason is already a way in which we participate in the divine logos. And so there was not that sharp dichotomy between natural reason and revelation. And that's another way in which Aristotle sort of indirectly helped to shape these two different Christian cultures, two different intellectual Christian cultures.